The following story is inspired by the agricultural traditions of America's heartland. The characters, places, and specific details are fictional, created to honor the craftsmanship and quiet dignity of generations who worked the land. Any resemblance to persons living or deceased is coincidental. On a Tuesday morning in late July of 1978, a 15-year-old girl named Merritt Ashcombe pedaled a green Schwinn bicycle 16 miles along a dirt road in Sheridan County, Kansas. She carried a Folgers coffee can wedged into the wire basket on her handlebars. Inside that can was $240 in cash, mostly ones and fives, a handful of tens, and three $20 bills folded flat at the bottom. It was every cent she had saved since she was 8 years old. The sky above her was the color of skim milk, the way Kansas skies get in the hour before the heat settles in. Cicadas were already singing in the hedgerows. The air smelled of dust and alfalfa and the faint sweetness of a wheat field ready for harvest. Merritt wore her brother's old work shirt, the sleeves rolled up twice, and a pair of leather boots a size and a half too large, stuffed with an extra pair of socks in the toes. She reached Seibert Sale Barn at exactly 7:30 in the morning, an hour before registration opened. She locked the Schwinn to a fence post with a chain her grandfather had given her years ago, smoothed down the front of her shirt, and walked through the gate. And when she stepped into the auction yard, a man named Boyd Tremaine took one long look at her, turned to the circle of men beside him, and laughed. It was not a cruel laugh, not exactly. It was the laugh of a prosperous man who has seen something improbable and has learned over many years to announce his amusement loudly enough that other men will join in. It echoed across the packed dirt of the yard. It bounced off the tin walls of the sale barn. 63 registered bidders and perhaps 30 onlookers turned their heads to see who was being laughed at. They saw a small girl with a coffee can. 3 hours later, nobody was laughing. But there are things you need to know before we get to that. Things about the girl. Things about the letter she carried folded in the inside pocket of her brother's shirt. The letter her grandfather had sealed 2 years before his death with the words, "Only open this when you need it most." A letter she had never opened. Things about a secret inside the Oliver 88 tractor that sat in the north row of the auction yard. A secret that only one person in Sheridan County knew. And things about a winter night in 1962, 16 years before any of this, when a man named Elias Ashcombe stopped his pickup truck on a snowy stretch of Highway 23 and did something that he would never tell his family about. A thing that would come back on this Tuesday morning in 1978 to change everything. Let me tell you the whole story. Merritt Ashcombe was born in 1963, the youngest of three daughters, on a 180-acre wheat farm 6 miles outside the town of Hoxie, Kansas. Her father, Clayton Ashcombe, died in a farm accident in the autumn of 1974. She was 11 years old. We do not need to describe what happened. It is enough to say that grief came to the Ashcombe farm that fall and never entirely left. Her mother, Eleanor, was 42 years old on the morning of the auction. She worked 6 days a week at the Hoxie post office, sorting mail from 4 in the morning until noon, then coming home to do the farm bookkeeping on her kitchen table until the light faded. She was a widow holding a farm together by will and by prayer, and the prayer part was getting thinner as the years went on. There was a bank loan of $3,200 coming due in October of 1978. If they could not pay it, the Farmers and Merchants Bank of Hoxie would begin foreclosure proceedings on the quarter section that Clayton's grandfather had broken with mules in 1897. The only way to pay the loan was to harvest the wheat crop. The only way to harvest the wheat crop was with a working tractor. And the Ashcombe's tractor, an Alice Chalmers WD that Clayton had bought used in 1966, had thrown a rod through the engine block in April and was sitting in the machine shed with a tarp over it, waiting for a resurrection that would cost $800 they did not have. This is what Merritt Ashcombe was thinking about as she pedaled 16 miles in the summer dawn. She was thinking about her mother. She was thinking about the letter in her pocket, and she was thinking about the old man who had taught her everything she knew about the Oliver 88, her grandfather, Elias Ashcombe. Let me tell you about Eli. He was born in 1912 in a farmhouse on the same quarter section his grandson would later die on. He served stateside in the Army during the Second World War, working as a mechanic at Fort Leavenworth, and came home in 1945 with an understanding of engines that would shape the rest of his life. He farmed his own 240 acres in Thomas County for 41 years, And during those 41 years, he maintained every piece of machinery he owned because he believed that a farmer who could not fix his own equipment was a farmer at the mercy of someone else's schedule. He and his wife Sarah had raised 2 sons and a daughter on that farm. Between them, his children gave him 6 grandchildren, 5 boys and 1 girl. Only his granddaughter Merritt ever followed him into the equipment shed. She was 8 years old the first time. She had been hiding from her older sisters, who were playing a game with rules she did not understand. And she found herself standing in the doorway of her grandfather's shed, watching him work. Eli was bent over the open hood of a 1948 John Deere B, adjusting a carburetor with a tiny screwdriver, and a patience that seemed, to the 8-year-old watching, like a kind of magic. He did not look up. He simply said, without turning, "Hand me that 3/8 wrench, would you, Mary?" She did not know which wrench was a 3/8, but she reached into the tool tray on the bench, picked up something that looked important, and handed it to him. He took it without looking, turned it once in his hand, handed it back and said, "That's a 1/2 inch. Try the one next to it." And she did, and she got it right. And that was how it began. For the next 6 summers, Merritt spent every afternoon in her grandfather's shed. She handed tools. She watched disassembly. She learned to listen to an engine the way a doctor listens to a chest, for what the sound was telling you about what was happening inside. By the time she was 12, Eli trusted her with compression checks on his own gauge. By 13, with carburetor rebuilds. By 14, with valve adjustments, which require a kind of precision that most grown men do not possess, but that Merritt had, in a form that Eli once described to her mother as a gift she did not yet know she had. On her 14th birthday, he gave her a compression gauge of her own, wrapped in brown paper, with her initials scratched into the brass handle. Let me pause here for a moment and ask you something. Have you ever taught someone something so carefully, so patiently, that you were not sure until years later whether they had actually understood? Have you ever given a piece of yourself to a child, a recipe, a way of folding sheets, a prayer your grandmother taught you, not knowing if the gift would take root? That is what Elias Ashcombe was doing in that shed in Thomas County, Kansas, in the summers of 1971 through 1976. And he did not know, could not have known, whether Merritt was truly absorbing what he was teaching her. He simply gave it. The way you give things to the people you love, without guarantee. He died in October of 1976 of a heart attack in his sleep. He was 64 years old. Merritt was 13. He left her his wooden toolbox, 40 years of carefully maintained hand tools in a chest he had built himself from red oak. He left her a set of 3-ring binders containing every service bulletin Oliver Corporation had mailed to its dealers from 1948 through 1975, filed in chronological order. And in the bottom drawer of his workbench, wrapped in wax paper, she found a letter with her name on the envelope, and the words, "Only open this when you need it most," written in his careful block letter printing. She had carried that letter in the inside pocket of her brother's work shirt for 21 months. She had never opened it. She was afraid that if she opened it before the right moment, whatever it contained would be wasted, and she would have nothing left of him. On the morning of the Seibert sale barn auction, the letter was in her pocket. She did not know yet that she was going to open it. A pause, if I may. I want you to think about something for a moment, because the next part of this story depends on it. Have you ever sat with something precious that someone gave you and not used it because you were afraid of using it wrong? A piece of jewelry in a drawer? A book with your mother's handwriting in the margin? A set of china passed down 3 generations that has never been taken out of the cabinet? We do this. We preserve things against an emergency that we hope will never come. And in the preserving, we sometimes forget what the thing was for. Eli Ashcombe had not given his granddaughter that letter as a keepsake. He had given it to her as a tool. But a tool is only a tool if you pick it up. Merritt did not know that yet. On the morning of the auction, she still thought the letter was something to be protected. She still thought she was alone. She was about to find out she was wrong about both. The Seibert sale barn was a corrugated tin structure off Highway 23, built in 1951 by a German immigrant named Heinrich Seibert, who had believed correctly that the post-war farm economy in western Kansas would need a place to buy and sell equipment. By 1978, the barn was run by his son Wendell, and it hosted 2 auctions a year, one in the spring and one in late summer. And those auctions drew serious buyers from 4 counties. The summer 1978 auction had 81 lots listed in the catalog. Merritt had a copy of the catalog that she had mailed away for in June, and she had circled 4 lots in pencil. 3 of them were too expensive for her coffee can. The fourth was Lot 17, a 1953 Oliver 88 row crop tractor, 4-cylinder gasoline engine, condition described in the catalog as engine runs, front axle shows impact damage, sold as is. Estimated value $200 to $400. Merritt had stayed up until 2 in the morning on 3 separate nights in June, reading everything in her grandfather's binders about the Oliver 88. She had read the 1956 service bulletin until she could recite the relevant paragraph from memory. She knew exactly what she was looking for when she walked into that auction yard. The Oliver 88 was in the north row, third from the end. The paint was sun-faded, with rust spots eating through the rear fenders. One fender was missing entirely. The front axle sat at a visible lateral tilt, the kind of tilt that any experienced equipment buyer would recognize in half a second as impact damage. A bent axle meant a major repair. A major repair meant this tractor was worth its parts value and very little more. That was what the serious buyers saw when they looked at Lot 17. It was not what Merritt saw. She knelt down beside the front axle with her folding ruler in her hand and measured the lateral displacement from the kingpin housing to the outside of the wheel flange, 4 1/4 inches. The 1956 Oliver Service Bulletin, paragraph 3, subsection B, stated that in the 1952 and 1953 model years of the Oliver 88, a manufacturing tolerance in the kingpin bushing assembly had caused field reports of front axle lateral shift in units with high hours of operation. The bulletin described the presentation as apparent impact damage, typically 4 to 4.5 inches of lateral displacement at the wheel flange, no structural compromise to the axle itself, correctable by replacement of the kingpin bushing assembly, estimated parts cost $11.40, estimated labor 3 hours. The axle was not bent. The bushing was worn. And Merritt Ashcombe was the only person in the Seibert sale barn that morning who knew it. She was kneeling beside the front wheel of Lot 17 with her compression gauge in her hand, the one Eli had given her on her 14th birthday, with her initials scratched into the brass handle, when Boyd Tremaine walked over. Boyd was 52 years old. He was 6 feet and 1 inch tall. He had a face that had been handsome at 30 and was now beginning to soften into the face of a man who ate well and slept poorly. He wore a pressed white shirt, a bolo tie with a turquoise clasp, and a Bulova watch on a silver band. He smelled of Old Spice aftershave, and something underneath the Old Spice that Merritt would later understand was cigar smoke from the night before. Boyd Tremaine owned Tremaine Farm Equipment in Hoxie. It was the authorized John Deere dealership for 3 counties. He had been selling new tractors since 1961. He was the single largest individual taxpayer in the town of Hoxie, and he had strong opinions about nearly everything. And one of those opinions concerned a man named Elias Ashcombe, who had been dead for 21 months. Eli and Boyd had known each other for a long time. They had not been friends. In 1969, Eli had stood up at a meeting of the Sheridan County Wheat Growers Association and said in front of 40 men that Boyd Tremaine was selling debt, not tractors. He had said that a farmer who bought a new combine on a 5-year note, when his old combine had 6 good years left in it, was not being helped by his dealer. He was being farmed by his dealer. It had become one of those quotations that followed a man. People repeated it at feed stores. People repeated it at Rotary Club lunches. Boyd Tremaine had not forgiven it. Eli Ashcombe had not apologized. In 1970, when Eli had been diagnosed with early-stage lung cancer that he would later recover from, Boyd Tremaine had driven out to the Ashcombe farm with an offer to buy the land. Eli had stood on his porch and listened for perhaps 4 minutes before he had said, "Boyd, I'm going to go back inside now, and you're going to drive off my property, and we will not speak of this again." They had not spoken of it again. Eli had lived 6 more years. Boyd had never forgotten the humiliation. And now Boyd Tremaine was standing 10 feet from Eli Ashcombe's granddaughter, watching her use a compression gauge on an Oliver 88, and he found it, at that particular moment on that particular morning, to be extremely funny. "Look at that, fellas," he said loud enough to carry. "Eli Ashcombe's little granddaughter's playing mechanic." The men around him laughed. "Girl," Boyd said, turning to Merritt directly now, "you know what that gauge is for? Or are you just copying what your grandfather used to do?" The laughter got louder. A few of the onlookers drifted closer to watch. Merritt stood up slowly. She closed the compression gauge. She looked Boyd Tremaine in the face, and in a voice that was steadier than she felt, she said, "Yes, sir, Mr. Tremaine. I know what it's for. Would you like me to show you how to use it?" The laughter did not stop. If anything, it got louder. But something in it shifted, in the way that laughter shifts when a joke lands differently than the joker intended. A few of the men looked at Boyd. A few of them looked away. And that was when Boyd's son came around the corner. Nolan Tremaine was 17 years old. He was going to be a senior at Hoxie High School in September, and he had played second-string quarterback for the Hoxie Indians for 2 years running. He had his father's height and his mother's complexion, and none of his father's ability to read a room. In the 9th grade, which was Merritt's freshman year at Hoxie High, Nolan had cornered her in the cafeteria and had said loudly enough for the 3 tables around them to hear that her family was going to lose their farm because her father was dead and her mother could not do math. Merritt had cried in the cafeteria. She had never forgotten it. Neither had Nolan. Now at the auction, Nolan walked up beside his father, grinning, and said, "Dad, don't waste your breath on her. Last year I told her her family was going to lose the farm, and she cried in the lunchroom." Here is what I want you to understand about that moment. Merritt Ashcombe was 15 years old. She was standing in a public auction yard in front of perhaps 80 men. Her family's private shame, the grief of her father's death, and the poverty that had followed had just been spoken aloud by a boy she had known since elementary school, for the amusement of his father. She had no one in that yard who belonged to her. Her mother was at the post office. Her sisters were in Topeka and Denver. Her grandfather was in the ground. She had a coffee can, a folding ruler, and a sealed letter in her pocket. What she did next is why I am telling you this story. She did not cry. She did not run. She did not even raise her voice. She turned to Nolan Tremaine, and in the same steady voice she had used with his father, she said, "Nolan, I'm sorry that happened in the lunchroom. I was 14. If it happened today, I'd handle it different." Then she turned back to the Oliver 88, knelt down, and went back to work. The yard was quiet for a moment. Boyd Tremaine looked at his son. Nolan opened his mouth to say something, and then he closed it. Boyd took his son by the elbow and walked him away. From across the yard, standing in the shade of the sale barn, a man with a pronounced limp was watching. His name was Harlan Briggs, and in a few minutes he was going to change the course of Merritt Ashcombe's life. But she did not know that yet. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been standing somewhere, minding your own work, not knowing that another person was watching you? And the way they were watching you was about to matter more than anything that had happened to you in years? That is what was happening in the Seibert Sale Barn auction yard at 8:17 in the morning on a Tuesday in July of 1978. Merritt Ashcombe did not know she was being watched. She thought she was alone. She was not. Harlan Briggs was 48 years old on the morning of the auction. Although he walked like a man of 65, he had a limp in his right leg that had come from 2 compound fractures sustained on a snowy night in 1962. Fractures that had healed imperfectly because the local doctor in 1962 had done the best he could with what he had, and what he had was not enough. Harlan did not complain about the limp. He had made his peace with it many years ago. He owned Briggs Equipment, a small used tractor dealership on the west side of Hoxie. He had been in the business for 22 years, and for 22 years he had been Boyd Tremaine's nearest competitor, although nearest is a relative term. Boyd sold 60 to 80 new tractors a year. Harlan sold 12 to 20 used ones. They had coexisted, the way 2 trees of different species coexist in the same pasture, without friendship and without particular animosity. Harlan had come to the Seibert auction that morning with no intention of bidding on Lot 17. He had looked at the Oliver 88 during the preview the previous day and had come to the same conclusion that every other experienced buyer had come to. Bent axle, parts value only, not worth his time. He had, however, known Eli Ashcombe. He had known him for 16 years. He had known him in a way that Eli's own family had never entirely known him. And when Harlan saw Merritt Ashcombe walk into the auction yard that morning with a coffee can in her hand, something turned over in his chest that he had not felt in a long time. When Boyd Tremaine laughed at her, Harlan did not move. He watched. When Nolan Tremaine said what he said about the lunchroom, Harlan felt his hands close into fists at his sides, and he still did not move. When Merritt answered Nolan the way she did, Harlan felt something that he could only later describe as the sensation of watching a debt come due. A debt he had been carrying for 16 years. A debt he had begun to think he would never be given the chance to repay. He began to make his way across the yard. Merritt was still kneeling beside the front axle when she heard a voice behind her say, "You're measuring for the bushing, aren't you?" She turned around. The man standing there was older, in his late 40s, with salt and pepper hair and a weathered face and a cane in his left hand. She did not know him. "Yes, sir," she said. 4¼ inches? She blinked. "Yes, sir." "How did you know?" Harlan smiled a small, careful smile. "Your grandfather told me about the 1956 bulletin in 1963. He tried to buy an Oliver 88 that year at a sale in Goodland. Said he'd missed one in 58 because he didn't know about the bulletin yet, and he was never going to miss one again. He talked about that tractor for 20 minutes. I've never forgotten." Merritt stood up slowly. "You knew him." "I knew him." Harlan looked at her for a long moment. "Child, I'm not going to bid against you on this tractor. I want you to know that. I want you to know it before a single card goes up." She did not know what to say. Her throat was tight. "Who are you?" she asked. "My name is Harlan Briggs. I own the used equipment lot on the west end of town. I've known your grandfather since the winter of 1962, and I owe him something I've been waiting a long time to pay. Don't worry about me today. You worry about that man from Nebraska who's been watching you from the fence line for the last 10 minutes. Merritt turned and looked. Standing against the fence, maybe 30 yards away, was a man she had not noticed before. He was in his mid-40s, wearing a clean canvas work shirt, a straw hat, and boots that looked too expensive for an auction yard. He was not looking at the Oliver 88, he was looking at her. Harlan Briggs said quietly, "His name is Caldwell Meekum. He's from North Platte. He's bought 4 Oliver 88s at auctions in the last 3 years, all of them with what the catalogs called bent axles. He knows about the bulletin, Merritt. He's the only other person within 400 miles who knows about the bulletin, and he has just now realized that you know about it too." Merritt's heart began to beat very hard. "What do I do?" she whispered. Harlan Briggs leaned on his cane. "You do exactly what your grandfather taught you to do. You bid your number and not a penny more. And when he tries to go around you, because he will, you look me in the eye across the yard, and I will take care of it." He turned and walked away before she could answer. She stood beside the Oliver 88 with her hand on the cool metal of the front fender, and she watched Harlan Briggs walk back across the yard to the shade of the sale barn, his cane making small pockmarks in the packed dirt with every other step. "I want you to stop and consider something. Somewhere in your life, at some moment you may not even have noticed, a stranger has been watching you. Not in a frightening way, in the way that witnesses watch, a person who saw something in you because they had been trained, by grief or gratitude or loss, to see it. And that person, years later, may have done something for you that you never fully understood. Most of us never find out who our witnesses have been." Merritt Ashcombe was about to find out, but not yet. First, she had to make a choice. The registration table was run by a woman named Delia Vanstone. She was 68 years old. She had taught Sunday school at the First Methodist Church of Hoxie for 41 years. She had taught Merritt Ashcombe in the 2nd grade. When Merritt set her coffee can on the registration table and began counting out the bills, Delia watched her without saying anything for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "Honey, are you sure about this?" Merritt looked up. She nodded. Delia nodded back. She wrote on her clipboard in a neat cursive hand, "Bidder number 47, Merritt Ashcombe, age 15, guardian, Eleanor Ashcombe, mother." She tore off the duplicate copy and slid it across the table with a wooden bidder's paddle. "Your grandfather," Delia said, "came to my class once in 1955 to fix the boiler. Did I ever tell you that?" "No, ma'am. He was a good man. I think he would be proud of you today, Merritt. I don't know what you're about to do, but I think he would be proud." Merritt could not speak. She took the paddle and walked away from the table. She was halfway back to lot 17 when Caldwell Meacham stepped into her path. He was smiling. He had the kind of smile that had been practiced for a long time in front of a mirror. "Young lady," he said in a voice that was soft and friendly and rehearsed, "could I have just a moment of your time?" Merritt stopped. She looked up at him. She said nothing. "You're a smart girl," Cal Meacham said. "I saw you measuring that front axle. I saw you check the compression. You know what you're looking at over there, don't you?" She still said nothing. "Here's what I'd like to propose," he said. "I'd like to make you an offer. $200 cash, right now. I'll hand it to you out of my billfold, and you'll walk away from lot 17, and you'll never bid on it, and we'll both go home happy." He paused. He was watching her face. $200 is more than double what you came here with, isn't it, young lady? I can see the can. I know what's in there. $200 could help your mother with something, I imagine. It could help a lot, and all you have to do is not raise your paddle. Merritt looked at him. "It's not stealing," Cal said gently. "It's not illegal. It's just good business. Two people who happen to know the same thing, coming to an arrangement. Happens every day at these auctions, young lady. Every single day." Merritt said, "Can I think about it?" "Of course you can," Cal said. "You think about it. The tractor doesn't come up until about 10:15. I'll find you before then." He tipped his hat. He walked away. Merritt stood very still in the middle of the auction yard. She was thinking about $200. She was thinking about the bank loan. She was thinking about her mother, sorting mail at 4 o'clock that morning, and her hand, of its own accord, had moved to the inside pocket of her shirt and was resting on the letter her grandfather had sealed in the autumn of 1976. She walked around the back of the sale barn. She sat down on a wooden crate in a patch of shade behind a stack of grain augers. And for the first time since the October morning when she had stood beside an open grave in the Sheridan Hills Cemetery and watched them lower her grandfather into the earth, Merritt Ashcombe began to cry. "Please, I want you to stay with her for this next part. I know some of you have sat where she is sitting. Not behind a sale barn, maybe. Not with a coffee can. But in some quiet corner of your life, with a choice in front of you that looked like mercy, and the voice in your head saying, 'Take the easy one. Take the safe one. Take the one that will make your mother smile tonight,' and another voice underneath it, quieter, saying something harder. $200 would have paid for groceries. It would have paid the electric bill. It would have given Eleanor Ashcombe one evening of not lying awake at 2 in the morning, staring at the ceiling. And all Merritt had to do was take it. Nobody would have known. Cal Meacham would have gone home to North Platte with an Oliver 88 he could turn around for $500. Merritt would have gone home with cash in her pocket. Her mother would have kissed her forehead and said, "Thank God." The world would have continued turning. I want you to understand that the choice was real. I want you to understand that taking the money was not cowardice. It was survival. And survival is not a small thing when you are 15 years old and your family's about to lose the land your great-great-grandfather broke with mules. Merritt Ashcombe sat on that wooden crate and cried for 7 minutes, and then she took the letter out of her pocket. Her hands were shaking so badly that she had to set the envelope down on her knee to open it. The paper was yellowed slightly at the edges. The flap had been sealed with the kind of adhesive glue that gets brittle over time, and it tore a little when she pulled it open. Inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper, folded in thirds, written in her grandfather's careful block letter printing. She read it twice before she understood it, and then she read it a third time, and she understood it. "Mary, if you are reading this, it means you have come to a hard thing. I cannot tell you what to do about the hard thing. I am not there, and this letter cannot answer what I do not know. But I want to tell you one thing. The compression gauge I gave you for your 14th birthday did not come from my savings account. I sold my father's pocket watch to pay for it, the gold one. You remember, it was the last thing I had from your great-grandfather. I did not tell anyone, not even your grandmother. She thought it was in the drawer where I always kept it. It was not. It had been in a pawn shop in Hayes since the summer of 1977. And on your birthday, in September of that year, I drove to Hayes and bought the compression gauge, and I never got the watch back. I am telling you this because I want you to know that I bet on you with the only thing I had that could not be replaced. I did not bet on you because you were my granddaughter. I bet on you because I watched you for 6 years, and I saw that you would go all the way to the bottom of a thing, and stay there until you understood it. Most people will not do that, Mary. Most people will not even try. You were trying when you were 8 years old and you did not know you were trying. So now it is your turn. Whatever the hard thing is, I want you to bet on yourself. Not because it is safe, not because it will work, because it is the only bet worth making. I love you, Mary, your grandpa Eli. She read it one more time to be sure, and then she lit a match from the book of matches in her pocket, and she burned the letter in the dirt behind the sale barn. She watched the paper curl black and break apart in the small flame. She scattered the ashes with the toe of her boot. She had not thought about burning it before that moment. She would not be able to explain later why she had done it, but there was something in her that knew, without having to be told, that the letter had done its work, and that the right way to honor it was to give it back to the heir. She walked around the sale barn. Cal Meacham was standing near the auctioneer's stand, watching for her. She walked up to him. She looked him in the face. She said, "No, sir, I'm going to bid." The auction began at 9 o'clock in the morning. The auctioneer was a man named Vernon Blackwood, 61 years old, with a voice like a chain being dragged over gravel, and a rhythm he had been perfecting for 34 years. He worked through the first 16 lots in 72 minutes. A grain auger sold for $180, a John Deere B for $420, a 6-row planter for $640, a rusted-out sickle mower for $45 and a handshake. Merritt stood beside lot 17 with her bidder's paddle in her hand and her coffee can clutched to her chest. The coffee can was empty now, except for $3 in quarters. The $237 she had left to spend was folded into the breast pocket of her brother's shirt. At 10:11 in the morning, Vernon Blackwood walked to the Oliver 88. He read from his catalog sheet. Lot 17, folks, 1953, Oliver 88 row crop tractor, 4-cylinder gas, engine runs. Front axle shows impact damage. Sold as is, where is, no warranty expressed or implied. Let's open the bidding at 150. Silence. 100. Silence. $75, gentlemen. Parts value, $75 on a running tractor. Caldwell Meacham raised his card. 75 from the man at the fence. Do I have 80? Merritt raised her paddle. Vernon Blackwood looked at her. His eyes narrowed for just a moment, and then he nodded, professional, and said, 80 from the young lady. Do I have 90? Cal, 90. Merritt, 100. Cal, 110. Merritt, 120. Boyd Tremaine was standing near the edge of the crowd with his arms folded across his chest. He was not bidding. He was watching with a small, tight smile on his face. Cal, 130. Merritt, 140. A ripple moved through the crowd. Men leaned toward each other and murmured. Somebody laughed and was shushed by the person next to him. The yard, which had been half attentive, was now entirely attentive. Cal, 150. Merritt, 160. Cal, 170. Merritt paused. She had $237. She needed $11.40 for the bushing kit. She needed $15 for the flatbed trailer rental to haul the tractor home. She could not bid more than $210. 210 was the absolute ceiling. Vernon Blackwood looked at her. 170, young lady. She raised her paddle. 180. Cal raised his card smoothly. 190. Vernon. 200? Merritt raised her paddle. Cal paused for the first time. He was doing math in his head. At $200, his margin on an Oliver 88 was still acceptable, but no longer comfortable. He looked at the tractor. He looked at the girl. He was not willing to lose to a 15-year-old in front of 80 men. Cal, 210. Vernon. 210 from the gentleman at the fence. Young lady? Merritt's arm would not move. 210 was her entire coffee can, minus the auction registration fee. She would win the tractor and lose everything else. No bushing kit, no trailer. A 3,000-pound piece of iron sitting on the Seibert sale barn lot that she had no way to pay to move and no way to pay to repair. She knew this. She had calculated it 6 different ways on the bicycle ride that morning. Her hand did not move. Vernon began the count. 210 going once. Boyd Tremaine was smiling openly now. 210 going twice. And then, from the shade of the sale barn, Harlan Briggs began to walk across the yard. He did not hurry. He never hurried. He crossed the packed dirt with his cane, making it small pockmarks, and the crowd parted in front of him the way crowds part for a man who has earned the right not to be jostled. He walked up to Caldwell Meekum, and he leaned in, and he said something quietly into Cal's ear that nobody else could hear. He spoke for perhaps 15 seconds. Cal Meekum's face went white. The color drained out of it the way color drains out of a sunset, all at once and from the top down. He looked at Harlan. He looked at the Oliver 88. He looked at Harlan again. He lowered his card. Vernon Blackwood paused in mid-count. He looked at Harlan, then at Cal, then at Merritt. He was a professional. He had seen many things at auctions over 34 years. He read the room with the practiced eye of a man whose living depended on it. He cleared his throat and said, "The bid from the gentleman at the fence is withdrawn. We return to the previous bid of $200, held by the young lady. 200 going once. Silence. Going twice. Silence. Sold. Lot 17. $200. To bidder number 47, Miss Merritt Ashcombe." The gavel came down. The yard did not erupt. It was too stunned to erupt. But a sound began to move through the crowd, a soft collective exhale, the sound of 80 grown men realizing simultaneously that they had just witnessed something they did not understand. Merritt stood beside the Oliver 88 with her paddle still in her hand. Her knees were shaking so badly that she had to put her other hand on the front fender to steady herself. Boyd Tremaine was no longer smiling. He was staring at Harlan Briggs with an expression that was not anger and was not fear, and was, in some way that Merritt would only understand later, something much worse than either. Harlan Briggs walked back across the yard toward her. He stopped in front of her. He said, "Young lady, I need to tell you a story. Can I tell you something? There are moments in a life that feel like the center. Moments where everything that has happened before and everything that will happen after seem to pivot on a single point. We do not always recognize them when they are happening. Sometimes we only recognize them decades later looking back. Merritt Ashcombe recognized this one. She would tell her grandchildren about it 40 years later. She would say, "I stood next to that tractor with my paddle still in my hand, and an old man with a cane told me a story, and my life became something I never expected it to become. Stay with me. The story he told her is the one you have been waiting for." Harlan led her to the side of the sale barn, to the patch of shade where he had stood that morning watching her work. He lowered himself onto an upturned oil drum. She sat on a wooden crate facing him. He said, "It was December of 1962, the week before Christmas. I was 32 years old. I had just opened my equipment lot the year before, and I was driving home from an auction in Colby on Highway 23. It had been snowing since 4 in the afternoon. The snow was heavier than they had forecast. I was in a 1958 Chevrolet pickup, and I was going a little too fast for the conditions, because I was young, and I thought I knew what I was doing, and I had a wife at home with a 2-month-old baby, and I wanted to get back before dark." He paused, his hands were folded on top of his cane. "I hit a patch of ice on a curve about 18 miles west of Hoxie. The truck went sideways. It rolled into the ditch on the north side of the highway. I was thrown against the steering column. Both bones in my right leg were broken. The truck was on its side. Gasoline was leaking from the tank and pooling on the snow. I could smell it. I was pinned in the cab and I could not get out. And the dashboard had been wired, the way old trucks were wired, in a way that meant a short circuit could start a fire at any moment. I was going to burn alive in that truck, Merritt. I want you to understand that. I knew it. I was 32 years old with a 2-month-old son at home, and I was going to burn alive in a Chevrolet pickup in a snowstorm, and nobody was coming." Merritt did not move. "About 20 minutes after the crash," Harlan said, "I heard another vehicle stop on the road above me. I heard a door open. I heard a man's voice call down into the ditch, asking if anyone was in the truck. I called back. I told him I was pinned. I told him about the gasoline. I told him to drive on and call the sheriff from the next farmhouse and not come near the truck. I was trying to save him, Merritt. I thought I was saving him." He looked at his hands. He did not drive on. He came down into the ditch. He was a man I did not know. He was about 50 years old, with a thick mustache and leather work gloves and a pry bar in his hand. He broke the window on the passenger side of the cab. He reached in. He could not get me out through that window. He went around to the driver's side. He worked the door with the pry bar for what felt like an hour but was probably 3 minutes, and he got it open enough to pull me out. He carried me up the side of the ditch on his shoulder. He carried me 200 feet to his own pickup. He put me in the cab, and he got in and he started to drive. And as we were pulling away from the wreck, I looked out the back window, and the dashboard shorted, and my truck caught fire. The flames reached the fuel tank about 90 seconds later. If that man had been 60 seconds slower, neither of us would have made it out of that ditch. Merritt was crying quietly. She did not try to stop. He drove me 47 miles to the hospital in Hays, Kansas, Harlan said. The snow was coming down so thick you could not see 50 feet. He drove that whole way with one hand holding the wheel and one hand holding a rag against the bleeding on my forehead. He did not tell me his name. When we got to the hospital, he carried me inside. He stayed in the waiting room through the night while they set my leg. When I woke up in the morning, he was gone. It took me 3 weeks to find out who he was, Harlan said. The hospital had his license plate number on the admission paperwork. I ran it down through a friend at the sheriff's office. I drove out to his farm in Thomas County on the second Saturday in January. I stood on his porch and I tried to thank him. And he said to me, and I remember every word, Merritt, because I have thought about them every week of my life for 16 years. He said, Harlan, if you want to pay me back, don't pay me. Pay someone else. When your chance comes, you'll know it. He looked at her. My chance, Harlan Briggs said, came this morning, when I saw you walk through that gate with a coffee can in your hand. Merritt could not speak. She did not try to speak for a long time. Harlan sat on his oil drum and watched her cry, and he did not say anything, because he understood that the story had not been told to make her cry, and it had not been told to make her grateful. It had been told because she had a right to know. She had a right to know who her grandfather had been. When she could speak, she said, What did you tell Mr. Meacham? Harlan almost smiled. I told him that the girl he was bidding against was Elias Ashcombe's granddaughter, and I told him that if he raised his card one more time, I would personally call every auctioneer from Wichita to Cheyenne and make sure he never bought another piece of equipment in this part of the country again. I told him I had been waiting 16 years to make that phone call, and I would enjoy making it, and I would not hesitate. And he believed me, because it was true. He looked at her. Your grandfather never told anyone, Merritt. Not your grandmother, not your father, not his brother Wendell, who lived 6 miles from him. He pulled a stranger out of a ruined truck on a snowy highway, and he carried that stranger to Hays, and he drove back to Thomas County that night, and he put his own truck in his own garage, and he went to bed next to your grandmother, and he never said a word. He did it because it needed to be done. And then he did not ask for credit, because that was not the kind of man he was. That, Harlan said, is what you come from, child. I want you to hold on to that. There are people in this country, and there have always been people in this country, who do what needs to be done and then go home and say nothing about it, who save a life and do not tell their wives, who teach a granddaughter everything they know and die without knowing whether the teaching took, who sell the only thing they have left of their own father to buy a birthday present for a child they believe in. They do not ask to be thanked. They do not ask to be remembered. They do the thing and they go home. Most of them are never found out. Most of them die unknown to the people whose lives they saved. Somewhere in your life, a person like this has acted on your behalf, and you have never known about it, and you will never know about it. Elias Ashcombe was one of them, and the granddaughter he had bet on was, in that moment behind the Seibert sale barn in July of 1978, becoming another one. Boyd Tremaine came around the corner of the sale barn about 4 minutes later. He was walking slowly. He was not smiling. He stopped in front of Harlan. He looked at Merritt, sitting on her crate with her face wet and her hands folded in her lap. And then he looked back at Harlan. Harlan, he said. His voice was flat. I did not know. I did not know she was Eli's granddaughter. If I had known, if you had known, you would still have laughed, Harlan said. His voice was not unkind. It was tired. That is the problem, Boyd. You would have laughed at Eli's granddaughter instead of at a stranger's daughter. You would have laughed either way. The laughing is the problem. It was the problem in 1969. It was the problem in 1970. It is still the problem today. Boyd said nothing. Go on home, Boyd, Harlan said. There is nothing for you to do here. Boyd looked at Merritt one more time. He opened his mouth. He closed it again. He turned and walked away. Merritt and her mother drove to the Seibert sale barn the following Saturday in a borrowed flatbed trailer. Harlan Briggs had offered the trailer at $5 instead of the $15 he usually charged, and he had refused to take more. They loaded the Oliver 88 with a winch and a set of wooden ramps. They drove it the 12 miles back to the Ashcombe farm in the slow, careful way that you drive a tractor home when you do not know yet whether you have been a fool or a genius. Eleanor Ashcombe did not say much on the drive, but when the Oliver 88 rolled off the flatbed and into the yard of the farm that her husband's grandfather had broken with mules, she began to cry. She cried the way a woman cries when she has been holding up the sky by herself for 4 years, and somebody has just set down a small piece of the sky beside her. Just one small piece, and suddenly the weight of the rest of it is a little bit less. Let me pause here, for those of you who know what that weight feels like. Some of you raised children alone. Some of you sat up nights with a sick husband and a stack of bills on the kitchen table. Some of you walked out to the mailbox every afternoon in the summer of 1983 or 1992 or 2008 and prayed that the envelope from the bank would not be there. You know the sound of the sky being held up by one pair of hands, and you know what it feels like when somebody sets down a piece of it beside you, even a small piece, and the weight shifts. Eleanor Ashcombe knew. She cried in the yard of her farm for perhaps 4 minutes, and then she wiped her face on the sleeve of her blouse, and she went inside to start supper. Merritt spent that Sunday afternoon in her grandfather's equipment shed. The light came in through the gaps in the cedar siding in long golden bars. The way it had come in on summer afternoons when she was 10 years old and her grandfather had been alive, and the hardest thing she had to worry about was whether she had handed him the 3/8 wrench or the half-inch. The shed smelled of 10W30 motor oil and cedar sawdust and the cold coffee that had been in a thermos on the workbench since October of 1976, because she had never been able to bring herself to pour it out. She opened her grandfather's red oak toolbox. She selected a socket wrench and a set of feeler gauges. She walked over to the Oliver 88 and began to replace the kingpin bushing. The work took 2 hours and 40 minutes. The parts cost $11.40, exactly as the 1956 service bulletin had predicted. When she was finished, she stood up and wiped her hands on a rag and walked around to the front of the tractor, and she looked at the front axle, and the wheel flange sat perfectly square to the ground. She climbed up into the seat. She turned the key. The 4-cylinder engine caught on the second pull of the starter and settled into the steady, unhurried rhythm of something that has been properly cared for and is prepared to work indefinitely. She drove the Oliver 88 out of the shed and up the dirt lane and onto the county road, and the front axle tracked true. She turned around at the mailbox and drove it back. She stopped at the Sheridan Hills Cemetery on the way home. She left the engine running at idle. She sat on the tractor seat for about 3 minutes and looked at her grandfather's headstone, which read, Elias Daniel Ashcombe, 1912 to 1976. A good man. She did not say anything out loud. She did not need to. The Ashcombe wheat crop came in on the first week of September, 1978. 178 acres of hard red winter wheat harvested with a borrowed combine and hauled with the Oliver 88. The crop brought $2,840 at the elevator in Hoxie. Eleanor Ashcombe took the check to the Farmers and Merchants Bank on the afternoon of September 14th. She paid down $2,780 on the loan that was due in October. The bank gave her a 6-month extension on the remaining $420. She paid that off in May of 1979 with the spring wheat check. The Ashcombes kept the farm. In April of 1979, Boyd Tremaine drove out to the Ashcombe place. He came alone. He parked his pickup in the yard, and he walked up to the back porch with his hat in his hands. Eleanor answered the door. She listened to him for perhaps 2 minutes without saying anything. Then she called into the house. Mary, Mr. Tremaine is here to speak with you. Merritt came out onto the porch with grease on her forearms. She had been rebuilding a carburetor for a neighbor. It was the 3rd carburetor she had rebuilt that month. Word had begun to spread in Sheridan County, the way word spreads in farm communities, which is faster than most people expect. Boyd looked at her. He was 53 years old now. He looked 10 years older than he had the summer before. Interest rates had begun to climb. The new John Deere 4 430s he had financed the previous autumn were not moving off his lot. His cash flow had turned negative in February. "Miss Ashcombe," he said, "I have come to apologize." He had written it out. He had practiced it on the drive. It came out stiffly, the way words come out when a man has not been in the habit of saying them for a long time. "I laughed at you at the auction last July. I said things to my friends about your family and about your grandfather that were not fair and were not true. I held a grudge against Eli for 9 years that was, when I look at it now, mostly about my own pride. And I took that grudge out on a 15-year-old girl who had never done a thing to me. I was wrong. I was wrong about you. I was wrong about your grandfather. I was wrong about a great many things." He paused. "I have also come," he said, "to ask for your help." Merritt did not say anything. "I have 7 used tractors on my lot that I took in on trade over the last 2 years," Boyd said. "I do not know what any of them are worth. I do not have the knowledge to evaluate used equipment properly. I have been selling new tractors for 18 years, and I am sorry to say, lost the ability to see a used tractor clearly. If I cannot move those 7 tractors this summer, I am going to have serious financial problems by Christmas. I would like to hire you to evaluate them. I will pay you $3 an hour. And Harlan Briggs has told me that if I do not pay you fairly, he will personally run me out of this county." I believe him. Merritt looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Tremaine," she said, "I will help you, but I will not take $3 an hour. I will do it for nothing on one condition." Boyd waited. "You tell Nolan about this conversation," Merritt said. "Not so he feels humiliated, so he knows that grown men can be wrong, and that they can say so, and that saying so is not weakness. That is the condition." Boyd Tremaine looked at the boards of the porch for a long time before he spoke. "I will tell him," he said. Merritt spent 3 weeks in May of 1979 on the Tremaine Farm equipment lot. She evaluated the 7 used tractors. She assigned each one a fair market value, with a written report explaining her reasoning. Boyd sold 5 of them within 2 months at the prices she had recommended. The other 2 he parted out. The income kept the dealership solvent through the winter. In the autumn of 1979, Boyd Tremaine began to change his business model. He began to stock fewer new tractors and more good-condition used ones. He hired a full-time mechanic, a man named Delbert Shaughnessy, who had apprenticed under Eli Ashcombe in the 1950s and was 58 years old in 1979. Boyd's dealership shrank. It also survived. He was one of only 3 John Deere dealers in northwest Kansas who did not declare bankruptcy during the farm crisis of the early 1980s. Nolan Tremaine went to Kansas State University for 2 years and dropped out. He came home to Hoxie in 1981 and went to work at his father's dealership as an apprentice mechanic under Delbert Shaughnessy. He learned to rebuild carburetors. He learned to set valves. He became, over many years, a patient and competent mechanic. He never apologized to Merritt Ashcombe for what he had said in the cafeteria in 1977 or what he had said at the auction in 1978. Some apologies are not meant to happen in words. Some are meant to happen in 30 years of quiet work, and in the way you raise your own children, and in the tools you hand to the next person who needs them. In September of 1979, on the first day of their senior year at Hoxie High School, Nolan Tremaine came up to Merritt in the hallway and said, "My dad said I should offer you a ride to school. I have a pickup, if you want one." Merritt smiled at him. "Thank you, Nolan, but I like my Schwinn." That was, for the rest of their lives, the extent of the conversation. It was enough. I want you to sit with that for a moment. We live in a time that believes in big apologies, public ones, televised ones, speeches written by people whose job it is to write speeches. And there is a place for those, I suppose. But the apologies that actually change the world, I have come to think, are the small ones, the ones that happen in hallways, the ones that happen in the quiet between 2 people who both remember the thing that was said, and neither of them has to name it out loud, because naming it would reduce it to a thing that could be named. Nolan Tremaine never said the word sorry to Merritt Ashcombe. But for the next 40 years, every time she brought a tractor to the Tremaine lot for a part that only Nolan could order, he found the part at his cost, and he did not charge her for his time. That is what his sorry looked like. That is what most real sorries look like in this country, among people who still believe in labor. Merritt Ashcombe graduated from Hoxie High School in May of 1981. She went to Kansas State University on a partial scholarship and a summer job she held at Briggs Equipment, where Harlan Briggs paid her $3.50 an hour to help rebuild used tractors on the lot. She majored in agricultural engineering. She was one of 3 women in a class of 47. She graduated in May of 1985 with honors. She came home to Hoxie. She opened Ashcombe Agricultural Services in her grandfather's equipment shed in June of 1985. She was 22 years old. She was the first female independent agricultural mechanic in the history of Sheridan County. The first year was hard. Some farmers would not bring their equipment to a woman. Some farmers brought it and then watched her work the whole time, arms folded, convinced she was about to break something. Some farmers left and never came back because a man from Colby had told them that a 22-year-old girl could not possibly know what she was doing. Harlan Briggs sent her every customer he could not take himself. Boyd Tremaine sent her the ones who needed work he could not do at his dealership anymore. Delbert Shaughnessy, the mechanic who had apprenticed under her grandfather, sent her the ones he was too old to crawl under. By the spring of 1987, she had more work than she could handle. She charged less than the dealerships. She kept better records. She refused to recommend repairs that were not necessary. She turned away work she could not do well and referred it to others. She put 15% of every paycheck into a separate account that she did not touch. By 1990, she had customers in 4 counties. By 1995, she was the trusted independent mechanic in Northwest Kansas. In October of 1995, Harlan Briggs came to her shop with a set of keys in his hand. He was 65 years old. His wife had died of cancer 2 years earlier. He had no children who wanted to run an equipment lot. He was closing Briggs Equipment and retiring to a cabin on Milford Lake. He set the keys on her workbench. He said, "Merritt, the lot is yours. The inventory is yours. The customer list is yours. I do not want money for it. I want it to go to the person your grandfather would have chosen." Merritt cried. She did not cry often. She cried for Harlan, and she cried for Eli, and she cried for her father who had never lived to see any of it. And she took the keys. Boyd Tremaine died of a heart attack on a Tuesday morning in March of 2003 at the age of 76. The funeral was held at the First Methodist Church of Hoxie. Merritt Ashcombe sat in the 4th pew from the back. After the service, Nolan Tremaine, now 42 years old and the owner of what remained of Tremaine Farm Equipment, came up to her with a small wooden box in his hands. "My father left this for you," he said. "He said you would understand." Inside the box was Boyd Tremaine's Belova watch on its silver band, the watch he had worn on the morning of the auction in July of 1978. There was a folded note underneath it. The note read, "Miss Ashcombe, I wore this on the morning I laughed at you. Keep it. You earned more than the watch that day. You earned whatever part of me was still worth something." Boyd Tremaine. Merritt kept the watch on a shelf in her shop for the rest of her working life. She did not wear it. She did not need to. I want you to sit with this for a moment. A man like Boyd Tremaine does not change easily. He does not change because someone asks him to. He does not change because he is shamed. He changes because one morning in July of 1978, a 15-year-old girl looked him in the face and did not flinch. And then she made a choice behind a sale barn that he would never know about. And that choice radiated outward into his life in ways he could not have predicted. He was changed by the ripples of her decision. So was Nolan. So was Caldwell Meekum, who went home to North Platte that afternoon and never bid against a young person at an auction again for the rest of his career. So was Harlan Briggs, who finally, after 16 years, got to set down a debt he had been carrying through every single day. One choice behind a sale barn by a girl with a coffee can. This is how the world actually changes. When it changes at all, not in speeches, not in laws, in coffee cans and folded letters and granddaughters who decide to bet on themselves. Merritt Ashcombe ran her agricultural services business for 31 years. She retired in May of 2016 at the age of 53 when her knees and her back had both finally told her that she could not keep crawling under tractors 8 hours a day. She sold the business to a young woman named Gracelyn Oberlander, who had apprenticed with her for 4 years, and who, Merritt was certain, would run it even better than she had. By the time she retired, Merritt had personally trained 14 apprentices, 9 women, 5 men. Every one of them had gone on to work in agricultural mechanics or related fields. 3 of them owned their own shops. She had expanded her collection of service bulletins, inherited as a single binder from her grandfather, to 43 binders covering every major agricultural equipment manufacturer in North America from 1941 to 2010. She had found most of the bulletins at estate sales, at swap meets, at auctions of retiring dealerships. She had paid anywhere from 50 cents to $200 apiece for them. She kept them on a shelf above her main workbench, organized by manufacturer and model year, and she referred to them weekly. In 2009, she bought back the 1953 Oliver 88. She bought it from the son of the farmer she had sold it to in the fall of 1978. The son had inherited it. It had been sitting in a barn for 11 years. She paid $900 for it. She spent the next 2 years restoring it in her off hours, and by 2011 it was running again. And she parked it under the overhang at the front of her shop, where anyone walking by could see it. On a shelf inside the shop, right above the cash register, she kept a Folgers coffee can. Inside the can was exactly $240 in cash. The same bills in the same denominations, arranged in the same order as the morning she had pedaled 16 miles to Seibert Sale Barn in July of 1978. She had replaced them over the years as the paper wore thin, but the composition was never changed. She never spent it. She never even took it off the shelf. On a Saturday afternoon in the summer of 2023, when Merritt was 60 years old, her great-niece came to the shop with her mother. The great-niece was 12 years old. Her name was Esperanza, though everyone called her Essie. She was Merritt's eldest sister's granddaughter, born in Denver and raised in Colorado, and she was spending 2 weeks of her summer vacation in Hoxie because her mother had told her she needed to learn where her family came from. Essie walked around the shop with wide eyes. She looked at the Oliver 88 under the overhang. She looked at the 43 binders above the workbench. She looked at the coffee can on the shelf above the cash register. "Aunt Mary," she said, "tell me the story about the auction." Merritt smiled. She pulled down the first binder from the left end of the shelf. It was the original Oliver binder, the one her grandfather had compiled between 1948 and 1975. She opened it to the 1956 Service Bulletin, paragraph 3, subsection B. She said, "On a Tuesday morning in late July of 1978, I pedaled a green Schwinn bicycle 16 miles along a dirt road in Sheridan County, Kansas. I carried a Folgers coffee can wedged into the wire basket on my handlebars. Inside that can was $240 in cash." Essie listened with her chin on her fist for the full 47 minutes it took Merritt to tell her the whole thing. She did not interrupt. She did not check a phone. She was 12 years old and she had been raised in a century that did not always leave room for 47-minute stories. But she had been raised by a mother who had been raised by a mother who had been raised by Merritt's own sister, and some things apparently travel down generations, whether we plan for them or not. When Merritt finished, Essie stood up from her stool and walked over to the shelf above the cash register. She looked at the Folgers coffee can. She did not touch it. She just looked at it for a long moment, the way you look at a photograph of someone you never met but wish you had. Then she turned to her great aunt and said, "Aunt Mary, will you teach me?" And Merritt Ashcombe, 60 years old, who had been waiting for 45 years for a child to ask her that question in those exact words, said what her grandfather had once said to her in a cedar-smelling shed in Thomas County, Kansas, in the summer of 1971. She said, "Hand me that 3/8 wrench, would you, child?" And Essie, who did not yet know which wrench was a 3/8, reached into the tool tray on the bench and picked up something that looked important. She handed it to her great-aunt. Merritt took it without looking. She turned it once in her hand. She handed it back. "That's a 1/2 inch," she said gently. "Try the one next to it." And Essie did, and she got it right. Elias Ashcombe bet the last thing he had on his granddaughter in the autumn of 1977. He sold his father's gold pocket watch, the only thing he had from his own father, and he bought a compression gauge, and he gave it to a 14-year-old girl for her birthday, and he did not tell anyone what the watch had cost him. He died 1 year later, without knowing whether the bet had paid off. It paid off. It paid off on a Tuesday morning in July of 1978, when a 15-year-old girl walked into a Kansas sale barn with a coffee can and walked out with a tractor. It paid off every time she fixed a machine for a neighbor at a fair price. It paid off in 14 apprentices, 9 women, and 5 men who learned from her what she had learned from him. It paid off in 43 binders of service bulletins on a shelf above a workbench in Hoxie, Kansas. It paid off in a Bulova watch and a wooden box. It paid off finally in a 12-year-old girl from Denver standing beside a toolbox on a Saturday afternoon, handing a wrench to a great aunt who had been waiting 45 years for the handoff. The deepest knowledge is never the widest. It is the kind that goes all the way to the bottom of one true thing and stays there long enough to understand it. And then it is the kind that gets handed, in whatever form it can be handed, to the next person willing to take it. Boyd Tremaine laughed when the girl arrived. Nobody laughed when she left. And 45 years later, on a summer afternoon in a machine shop in western Kansas, an old woman opened a binder and told a 12-year-old the story from the beginning. Then she taught her which wrench was which. That is how knowledge survives in this country. That is how it has always survived. One coffee can at a time, one wrench at a time, one child at a time, for as long as there are old women willing to teach and young women willing to learn. And there will always be. There always have been.